The rain had turned into a thin drizzle by the time I pulled into the cracked driveway. Evie was asleep in the back seat, her bunny pressed tight against her chest, the plastic hospital bracelet still wrapped around her tiny wrist. Her breathing was softer now, more steady, but every wheeze still tightened something in my chest. We'd been in the ER for 5 hours. I hadn't eaten, my legs ached, but she was okay. That was supposed to be enough. I parked beside the old Camry that never moved unless someone needed groceries. My house, at least on paper, stood still and gray in the afternoon gloom. The porch light flickered uselessly, even though it wasn't dark enough for it to matter. I exhaled and reached back to unbuckle Evie's seatbelt. She stirred, murmured something I couldn't quite catch, then wrapped her arms tighter around Bunny. "We're home," I whispered. "Let's go inside, baby." She nodded, still groggy, and followed me up the steps, her small hand in mine. I opened the door to the back unit, the one I lived in, the one they let me stay in as long as I kept pulling my weight. The smell of mildew clung to the walls, always worse after a rain. Before I could shut the door behind us, I heard her. About time, Jessa barked from the main kitchen, the one we technically shared. She stood with her arms crossed, lip gloss too perfect for someone not working. "Rent's due today, you know that." "No more excuses." I didn't answer. I bent down to unzip Evie's coat. She was watching. Always watching. I stood up slowly. "I just got back from the hospital with your daughter," I said. "And I'm not paying rent." Jessa's laugh was sharp. "You live here, don't you?" Before I could speak, Colby stepped in from the hallway. He looked at me once, then past me as if I weren't real. "You think you can just stay here for free? I own this house," I said. "It's in my name." His hand moved faster than my eyes could follow. One crack across the face. I stumbled back. My shoulder hit the wall. The copper taste hit my tongue before I knew what had happened. Blood. Evie screamed. When I looked up, he was sneering, and in that moment I finally understood something I had refused to admit for years. Colby didn't speak after it happened. He just turned and walked down the hall like he hadn't done anything unusual, like he hadn't just hit his mother in front of his daughter. Jessa stood there, unbothered, twirling a finger through her hair. Evie was still screaming, her voice ragged with fear. I held onto the wall to steady myself. I had seen this coming. Not the slap itself, maybe, but something like it. And I'd let it, piece by piece. It started 3 years ago after Colby lost his job. "Just for a few months, Mom," he said over the phone, his voice a little too smooth. "Until I get back on my feet." He and Jessa showed up with boxes 2 days later, moving into the main house like it was their own. She didn't ask. She decorated. Claimed the master bedroom. Hung curtains. They said it made sense for me to move into the smaller back unit. It had fewer stairs, and I was getting older. Jessa said it with a smile, like she was offering a kindness. I packed up the bedroom where I had slept beside my late husband for 20 years and moved into the unit behind the garage. Back then, Evie was barely walking. Jessa didn't want to deal with naps or tantrums, and Colby was too busy job hunting from the couch. So I watched her. I fed her. I changed her. She clung to me before she ever reached for them. When her asthma first flared, it was me who stayed up through the night with a humidifier and cold compresses. I didn't mind. She was my grandbaby. I would have done anything. Rent never came up at first. I paid the property taxes, the utilities, the repairs. Jessa kept saying they were between incomes, that I should be patient. I cooked extra meals. I drove Evie to appointments. When the electric bill doubled, I just paid it. And then last spring, Colby dropped a note under my door. A rent invoice for $650 on my own deeded property. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. But Jessa followed up the next morning, arms folded, asking if I was going to be late. I paid it. Not because I believed I should, but because Evie was still having attacks and I needed to be close in case it happened again. I told myself it was temporary. That once they stabilized, we'd go back to how things used to be. But now, with the sting still blooming across my face, I saw that nothing about this had ever been temporary, and nothing about them had stayed the same. Later that night, I walked into Evi's room and found the drawing that made something inside me crack. Evi was quiet after the slap. Too quiet. She didn't cry for long, just clung to Bunny and curled up on the far end of the couch, knees tucked to her chest, like she was trying to disappear. I brought her a warm towel and a cup of water, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Her little shoulders shook, once then stilled. I didn't press her. I just sat across the room holding an ice pack to my face, the cold biting into the swelling that had already begun to rise. Every breath hurt my jaw. My left cheek throbbed in waves. She fell asleep not long after. Bunny still tucked under her chin, her fingers knotted in his ear. I carried her gently to her bed, smoothing her curls off her forehead before pulling the blanket over her. When I turned to leave, I saw the paper on the floor. It was a drawing. Crayon on folded printer paper. A stick figure me laying on the floor, a red smear next to my face. Bunny was drawn in careful gray lines right beside me. Another figure, Evi, I assumed, stood in the corner with tears drawn in blue big streaks falling from oversized eyes. Jessa and Colby were there too. Frown's arms crossed tall above us. She'd even drawn the couch, the little rug, the corner of the coffee table I'd hit. I sat on the edge of her bed, holding the drawing in my lap like it might shatter if I moved too fast. I didn't hear her stir until her voice came soft and scared. "Will they hurt you again?" I looked over. Her eyes were open wide in the dim room. Bunny was still pressed to her chest. "No, baby," I whispered. "Not again." She didn't respond, just turned her face toward the wall. Back in my bathroom, I peeled off the concealer I'd dabbed over yesterday's bruise, the one they hadn't even noticed. My new one was worse. Darker, spreading like rot beneath the surface. I stared at myself in the mirror, the edges of Evi's drawing still crumpled in my hand. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel afraid. I felt something else. Steadier, heavier. It was the beginning of something I had buried for too long. And then the phone buzzed, lighting up the kitchen in the dark. The phone lit up with a message from Wynn across the street. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks, not really. We exchanged waves through the blinds, sometimes small talk over mailboxes. But this message had no greeting. Just a question. "Are you okay?" Beneath it, a video file. My hands went cold before I even touched the screen. I waited, stared at it, considered not opening it, but something in me knew what was there, knew before I tapped it and saw myself on the screen. It had been filmed through her living room window, angled perfectly toward ours. No sound at first, just movement. Colby's figure crossing the hallway, Jessa behind him, her mouth already twisted in that cruel smile. Then me, standing by the couch, Evi clutching Bunny at the edge of the frame. The slap came faster on screen than it had in my memory. My body jerked back. I fell, hit the table, then the floor. The sound of Evi's scream followed, high, sharp, tearing through everything like glass. The video ended with me on the floor, Evi crying, Bunny falling from her arms. I watched it twice, 3 times. On the 4th, I paused just before the slap. Studied my own face, the disbelief, the helplessness. The way my body curled inward, not just from pain, but from something deeper. A kind of recognition. Like even in that moment, I'd already accepted it. A new message followed. "You don't deserve this. You need help." I pressed the phone to my chest and let the silence close around me. In the background, the fridge hummed. A distant dog barked. Evi shifted in her sleep. No one had ever said that to me before. Not in so many words. Not without but attached. Not without reminding me I was family. And family meant swallowing pain with gratitude. I walked to the kitchen window, pulled the curtain back, and looked across the street. Wynn's porch light was still on. I couldn't see her through the glass, but I felt her presence anyway. Quiet, watchful, solid. I opened the drawer beside the sink and pulled out the folder where I kept the deed to the house. My name was still on it. Not Colby's. Not Jess's. Mine. And suddenly, I remembered every check I'd written for them. Every excuse I'd made. Every time I'd told myself it was just easier to stay quiet. But that night, I didn't feel quiet. I felt awake. The next morning, I drove straight to the county office. The woman behind the desk at the county recorder's office barely looked up when I slid my ID and property information across the counter. Her fingers moved fast over the keyboard, tapping through decades of records like they meant nothing. But to me, it felt like a reckoning. She turned the screen toward me. "This is your name, correct?" I nodded. It was there, plain as anything. Merelda Quinn. Sole owner. No cosigners. No liens. No transfers. I had never signed anything over to Colby. Never even considered it. But somewhere along the way, I'd let them live like they owned the place anyway. They had filled it with their furniture, their rules, their contempt. "They ever pay you rent?" the clerk asked. "Not officially," I said. "They've been living in the main house for almost 3 years." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. Just handed me a printed copy of the deed and told me to keep it somewhere safe. I kept it in my purse all the way to Mr. Penrose's office. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't talk more than necessary. He wore short sleeves in winter and kept a tissue box on his desk that hadn't been touched. I liked him for his lack of sympathy. I didn't need kindness. I needed facts. I laid out the situation, the slap, the false rent demands, the video, the drawing, Evi's quiet question. I watched his expression shift, only slightly tightening at the jaw. "They're not tenants," he said. "They're guests who overstayed. You have the right to serve them notice. 30 days minimum. You could pursue a restraining order based on the physical assault, especially with video evidence and a minor witness." I swallowed. "And if they refuse to leave," he didn't hesitate, "we file a formal eviction. Sheriff's office will enforce it. You'll need to stay firm." I stared at the manila folder in my lap, the weight of it heavier than it should have been. Not from the paper, but from the years of letting myself forget what I owned. What I had built. What I had protected even as I let it be taken over. I left his office with a plan. Not just an idea, a timeline. And when I opened the door to my duplex that evening and saw Jess's purse thrown on the floor like she lived there without question, I knew exactly when that would change. I stood at the bottom of the porch steps, the papers in my hand shaking slightly, though my grip stayed firm. The sheriff beside me said nothing. His presence alone was enough. He wasn't here to argue or explain, just to make sure I didn't do this alone. Colby was on the porch already, arms crossed, barefoot hair still damp from the shower. Jessa sat in a plastic patio chair scrolling on her phone like nothing outside her screen mattered. When she looked up and saw the sheriff, her whole body stiffened. "What's going on?" she asked, voice already sharp with suspicion. I stepped up. My knees were locked, but my voice came out steady. "You're being served." I held out the envelope. Jessa didn't take it, so I laid it on the small side table next to her, beside her half-drunk iced coffee. She stared at it like it was poison. Colby stepped forward. "What the hell is this, Mom?" I turned to him. 30 days. Then you leave." "Leave," he scoffed. "From my house, it's not your house," I said. "It never was." He laughed, but it was hollow. "You think a piece of paper gives you power now? You think this means anything to us, it means everything to me." Jessa stood her chair, scraping against the porch boards. "You're unbelievable," she spat. We took you in. We gave you a place to live. And this is how you repay us. You've been living in my house rent-free while demanding I pay you. You've turned my granddaughter's home into a place she's scared to sleep. Oh, so now you're a victim, Colby snapped, stepping closer. His voice dropped low. You think anyone's going to believe your version of things? She doesn't have to convince anyone, the sheriff interrupted, voice firm. This is a legal eviction. Your name isn't on the deed. If you don't leave by the date listed, we'll be back. Colby looked past me, then toward the driveway. Evie stood there, clutching Bunny in one hand, her other hand in mine. She looked so small between us, but her voice came out clear and full. Don't hurt my grandma again. Colby froze. Jessa's face turned red. I looked down at Evie and squeezed her hand gently. My own were trembling, but my voice didn't falter. You've got 30 days. After that, this ends. Jessa shoved the envelope off the table. You're a traitor, she hissed. You've turned your back on your own blood. I met her stare head on. No. I finally remembered who I am. As we turned to leave, Evie walked a little taller beside me. She didn't look back, and neither did I. We had 30 days to wait, but I knew peace had already started growing in the space they used to fill. The rental wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, faded siding, and creaky floors that groaned louder than any complaint I ever let slip. But it was ours. There were no eyes watching from the hallway, no slammed doors or shouted demands bleeding through the walls. Just space, just air. Evie picked the smaller room without fuss. She placed Bunny on her pillow and hung her drawings on the wall with tape, careful not to wrinkle the edges. The first one she taped up was new, a house with a red roof and yellow windows. 2 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright orange sun. One had gray hair. The other held a bunny. I stared at it longer than I meant to. No one was yelling in this picture. No one was on the floor. On our second morning there, I woke to quiet. No footsteps overhead. No thudding bass through shared walls. Just birds and the low hum of the fridge. It took me a minute to recognize the feeling I hadn't clenched my jaw in my sleep. My shoulders weren't sore from holding tension all night. I'd slept, deeply, without fear. I made pancakes that morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Evie ate 2, then ran to the living room to color more. Her humming returned. Quiet at first, then louder. It filled the space like something sacred. I started therapy the following week. The first session, I cried for 10 minutes without saying a word. The second, I spoke for the full hour and couldn't remember half of it. By the third, I admitted that I'd believed being needed was the only way to stay loved. That giving had become the only thing I knew how to do. The therapist didn't rush me. She just nodded and asked. And now I was learning how to rest. How to say no. How to sit in stillness without guilt crawling up my spine. Evie adjusted faster than I did. Children are like that, resilient, when you finally give them air to breathe. Her drawings became brighter. Her questions lighter. Her laughter more frequent. The day we passed the 30-day mark, she handed me a new picture. This time the house had a garden. The figures were the same, but there was something new, a sign next to the door. It read, "Home." That evening, as I tucked her in and kissed her forehead, my phone lit up with a message that shattered the calm. The message was from my cousin, Ray. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Her words blinked on the screen. I heard what happened. Jessa says you lost it, that you evicted your own son. Is that true? I didn't answer right away. I sat with it, let it sting, let it settle, then let it go. By noon, 3 more came in. One from my niece in Indiana, just checking in. If you need anything. Another from a church friend who hadn't reached out in years. And one from an aunt I barely remembered. Family is messy. You did what you had to do. The stories were moving fast, faster than I expected. Jessa had always been quick with a narrative. I imagined the version she was spinning, frail mother lashing out, tossing her son and his wife into the street with no warning. The parts she left out were the ones that mattered most. So I made a folder. I named it Safety for Evi. Inside, I dropped the video from Win. Screenshots of Jessa's text messages demanding money and calling me selfish. The photo of the bruise. The county records showing my sole ownership of the house. A voice memo I'd recorded one night after the slap, when the silence had grown too thick to sit with. I didn't blast it online. I didn't forward it to every relative. I just kept it backed up, organized, ready. If anyone wanted the truth, they'd have to ask for it directly. And if they didn't, that was fine too. I was done defending myself to people who only called when the drama was interesting enough. Colby and Jessa, I later heard, were staying in the converted garage of a friend who didn't ask questions. Someone said Jessa complained about the smell, that Colby still blamed me for ruining everything. But I didn't need to know more. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted space, and now I had it. Some nights I still woke up with my jaw clenched, as if the past was pulling at me from beneath the blankets. But then I'd hear Evie's breath slow and even from the next room, and I'd let myself settle again. Therapy helped. Time helped more. Evie's teacher sent home a note saying she seemed lighter, more focused in class. "She's drawing more," the teacher wrote. "Happier things." Tonight, I stood in the doorway of her room. She was asleep, her cheek pressed against the pillow, one arm curled around Bunny. The soft rise and fall of her chest matched the rhythm of the life we'd made, quiet, earned, real. I used to believe I was a burden, that if I didn't give, I'd be discarded. But standing there, watching her sleep in peace, I felt something I hadn't dared name until now. I am not a burden. I was the gift they wasted.